Well, hello everyone. I just want to wish everyone a happy Indigenous People Day. Yes, we got our day, you guys. And I wanted to read a little bit about the history while I'm in traffic. I'm not driving. I'm Roz, and I am Native American. I do have Native American in my family, and I wanted to read about, and I'm just rocking my two braids and my little Indian feathers today. So and I didn't even realize it, that it was Indigenous People Day. Ooh, shame. This must be new. But here is a letter. It's from the White House, from President Joe Biden, about Indigenous People Day. It's a proclamation on Indigenous Peoples Day 2021. Here we go. Since time, whoa, sorry y'all, I'm in the car. Whoa, all right.
People don't want to move. I mean, people just
since time immemorial, American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and Native Hawaiians have built vibrant and diverse cultures, safeguarding land, language, spirit, knowledge, and tradition across the generations. On Indigenous People Day, our nation celebrates the invaluable contributions and resilience of Indigenous peoples, recognizes their inherent sovereignty, and commits to honoring the federal government's trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations. Our country was conceived on a promise of equality and opportunity for all people. A promise that, despite the extraordinary progress we have made through the years, I don't know about that, but we have never fully lived up to. That is especially true when it comes to upholding the rights and dignity of the Indigenous people, who were here long before colonizations of the Americas began. So a little truth for you. For generations, federal policy systematically sought to assimilate and dispute. Oh, I lost my place. Wait a minute. Oh, okay. A promise that, sorry y'all, who were here long before, Today we recognize the Indigenous people's resilience. Okay, I read that already. Okay. We also recommit to supporting a new, brighter future of promise and equity for tribal nations, a future grounded in tribal sovereignty and respect for the human rights of Indigenous people in the Americas and around the world. There was something else I was reading. Americans began. Let me back up a little bit, y'all. Okay. We have never fully lived up to it. That is especially true when it comes to upholding the rights and dignities of Indigenous people, who were here long before colonization of the Americas began. For generations, federal policy systematically sought to assimilate and displace Native people and eradicate Native cultures. Today, we recognize Indigenous people's resilience and strength, as well as the immeasurable positive impact that they have made on every aspect of American society. We also recommit to supporting a new, brighter future of promise and equity for tribal nations, a future grounded in tribal sovereignty and respect for the human rights of Indigenous people in the Americas and around the world. there's a lot more too. See, in the first week of my administration, I issued a memorandum reaffirming our nation's solemn trust and treaty obligations to American Indian and Alaska Native tribal nations, and directed the heads of executive departments and agencies to engage in regular, meaningful, and robust consultation with tribal officials. It is a priority of my administration to make respect for tribal sovereignty and self-governance the cornerstone of federal Indian policy. History demonstrates that Native American people and our nation as a whole are best served when tribal governments are empowered to lead their communities, and when federal officials listen to and work together with tribal leaders when formulating federal policy that affects tribal nations. Let's see, how much more do I have to do? The contributions that Indigenous people have made throughout history in public service, entrepreneurship, scholarship, the arts, and countless other fields are integral to our nation and our culture and our society. Indigenous people have served and continue to serve in the United States Armed Force with distinction and honor at one of the highest rates of any group, defending our security every day. And Native Americans have been on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic, working essential jobs and carrying us through our gravest moments. Further, in recognition that the pandemic has harmed Indigenous peoples at an alarming and disproportionate rate, Native community have led the way in connecting people with vaccination, boosting some of the highest rates of any racial or ethnic group. Okay, so that's getting into COVID-19 stuff. Federal government has a solemn obligation to lift up and invest in the future of Indigenous people and empower tribal nations to govern their own communities and make their own decisions. We must never forget the century-long campaign of violence, displacement, assimilation, and terror wrought upon Native communities and tribal nations throughout our country. Today, we acknowledge the significant sacrifice made by Native peoples to this country and recognize their many ongoing contributions to our nation. On Indigenous People Day, we honor America's first inhabitants and the tribal nations that continue to thrive today. I encourage everyone to celebrate and recognize the many Indigenous communities and cultures that make up our country. Now, therefore, I, Joseph R. Biden, Jr., President of the United States of America, do hereby proclaim October 11, 2021 as Indigenous Peoples Day. I call upon the people of the United States to observe this day with appropriate ceremonies and activities. I also direct that the flag of the United States be displayed on all public buildings on the appointed day in honor of our diverse history and the Indigenous peoples who contribute to shaping this nation. So, wow. So it's no longer Columbus Day, it's Indigenous People Day. You know, I grew up all my childhood life, most of my adult life, believing that Christopher Columbus discovered America. And I never understood why the cowboys and the Indians, you know, were at war with each other. And the Indians were defending their land. So it's nice to remember Indigenous people today. After all, they are the first settlers, as far as we know now, in the Americas. Boy, it took a long time too for them to get recognized. So that was just my little history lesson for today.